My name is Dr. Pai. I wrote a critically acclaimed book called An Inflammation Nation. It's what I consider the 10-step definitive guide of preventing, reversing, and treating all disease. And I want to talk about a little bit about my background today. I'm going to talk about what is inflammation, some of the problems with our healthcare system of why we have a lot of this inflammation, some of the problems of our food industry of why we have the inflammation as well. Don't mean to be political, but sometimes I will get political because we're in a political state of mind right now. And I want to then give a little bit aspects of what can we do in addition to the diet in terms of when we interview a patient from an integrated perspective of how to look for even food sensitivities, how do we look at nutrient levels, how do we look at your microbiome, how do we strengthen your immune system, and how do we lower inflammation using natural therapies. And if I have time, I'll try to cover some of the other steps in my book. So my journey begins actually at the age of 2, when I had my first near-death experience. And I've had many since. And that started when I was age of 2. My parents, coming home from a long day of work, they stopped by their local farm, and my dad picked up a bag of peanuts. And as we're in the kitchen, my mom was cooking some dinner. My dad was sitting on the table, put me on the table, and he was shelling some peanuts, and everybody was eating the peanuts after work. Within a few minutes, they started noticing that my eyes started to swell up, and it became the size of oranges, and my lips started turning a little light blue type color. My throat started to close up, and I basically fell over. And my dad, luckily being a great physician as he is, he took me immediately to the emergency room, and thankfully I lived in a small town, so the hospital wasn't that far away. They took me to the emergency room, and they gave me epinephrine, they gave me steroids, they put me on a ventilator, intubated, and that was able to save my life. I had a severe anaphylactic reaction to a food. At the same time, though, so Western medicine saves my life. At the same time, at the age of 2, I started to develop this chronic eczema. And it was a very bad eczema, so bad it almost looked like psoriasis. I got these really bad plaques all over my body and neck and arms, and that plagued me throughout my life. In fact, it started in not only since the age of 2, but when I started to play soccer in my elementary school, I'd wear long sleeve shirts and long socks. That plagued me all the way through high school, all the way through college, all the way through medical school, all the way to residency, and even fellowship program, okay? And then in 2009, as a late bloomer as I would say, turning into the plant-based diet and plant-based world, I read the book, The China Study, which Dr. Colin Campbell will be here later this week, which I recommend everybody to attend. And he's been a big influence because his book had the definitive study of looking at kind of diet and lifestyle interventions on a large population. And that data was so impressive to me, because I'm an evidence-based person. You'll know if you read my book, 400 pages with 1,500 references of scientific studies and investigative journalism. I like data, and so I actually took the effort to take the course at Cornell before it was even a CME course. I said, I just want to learn more about it. So me and my partner, Maureen and I, we took the course, and after we read the book and then we finished the course of looking at all the 8,000 data points of why diet and how diet affects health, we said, let's go plant-based. So interesting enough, within 2 weeks of going on a whole food plant-based diet, my eczema disappeared. Completely, okay? Now, this was shocking because, throughout my training, when I finished my fellowship in 2002, and, Stephen mentioned all my backgrounds of all the different various treatments and modalities that I've studied, and I've traveled across to India and other countries and had world training with experts in herbalism medicine and Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese medicine and acupuncture and homeopathy. Everything that I would use for my eczema, from a conventional standpoint, from dermatologists, allergists, immunologists, was just symptomatic treatment, right? Here's a salve, or here's a steroid, or here's an immunosuppressive drug, or antihistamine, and it would help partly for a while, but as long as I stopped taking the product, I would still flare, okay? And they had many side effects that I was trying to avoid as well. Same thing with the natural products. I would take an herb, I would take a homeopathic, I would, a salve or a potion, as we call it, or a lotion, as you want to call it, and that would calm the eczema down, but if I stopped using it, I would flare again. So within 2 weeks of a plant-based diet, it went away. So this led me to understand, well, there's something there that's in the diet that's triggering eczema. We know eczema is an inflammatory response. But it wasn't so important that it was something miraculous to me, is that we missed the concept in Western medicine of my acute care was wonderfully perfect, and I still carry an EpiPen, and we still like people to go to the hospital for acute care. But this led me to look at, well, what has it affected to not only me, but also my patients' chronic conditions? Because everybody has chronic inflammatory responses. So in this review of what is causing this led me to take this journey and this is what led me to write the book and let me develop a product actually that's supportive, is that I had to go further. Why are we here? Why did the system actually miss my eczema? And why was I actually being exposed to something that could actually trigger that in my diet? And so this led me to go discover, inconveniently sometimes, of investigating, follow the money. I'm the kind of guy I follow. I'm really kind of a medical investigative kind of person. So it's not just science, it's like, why are we here and what's going on to keep us here? And so with that in mind, we came to this. My opinion is that right now, healthcare is under assault. Insurance companies, for example, are not in the business for our health. They're in there for profits, right? Wall Street profits, stock market profits, CEOs and high administrative salary profits, medical companies, supply companies, pharmaceutical companies, even going into the food companies, right? This is all what's keeping us unhealthy. And I'll just give you an example. People say, well, gosh, shouldn't we have some kind of universal health care? Yeah, we should. I'm going to talk a little bit of politics because we can afford it. Because right now, we can't afford just our health care. Let me give you an example. If any of you have been to the hospital just for a simple pneumonia for 3 days, that's $10,000. If you have a fracture, it's about $15,000. If you have low back pain with a little disc problem, it's $18,000. If you have a little chest pain with a little bit of cardiac, maybe possible myocardial infarction or heart attack, that's $20,000. If you have even a heart valve problem, that goes up to $42,000. I haven't even talked about a gunshot wound or an unfortunate car accident happening. Now, if you have cancer, the cancer early stage diagnosis up to stage 3 can be anywhere from $100,000 to $300,000. And then when we get to up to stage 4, at end stage, it can be up to $1.4 million. Okay? Now, here's the problem. Everybody has an insurance policy that we pay a premium. The average person is spending about $400 to $800 to $1,200 a month as their premium. Then they have a deductible. The deductible is how much you pay before your insurance kicks in. So the average deductible now is anywhere from $4,000 to $8,500 per person. So you have to pay your deductible, you're paying your monthly premiums before your insurance kicks in. But here's even further the kicker, is that they have something called coinsurance. So in your policy, you'll say that there's roughly a 30 to 50% coinsurance. That means you owe 30 to 50% of your hospital stay. Okay? Now, again, the number's 100,000 up to 1.4 million. That means you will owe 30% to 50% of whatever the hospital charges because there's no control of healthcare. So we cannot afford the way healthcare is going right now. And then you have to pay copays, believe it or not, right? So you have to then pay a copay when you see your doctor. You have to pay copay when you get your medications. You have to pay a copay with your laboratory fees and your x-rays. So the way we're looking at healthcare is not affordable. And we actually have to be looking at something, I don't want to be political, but universal healthcare is not a radical idea. If you look at all these countries here on the map, right, these are countries that we travel to on vacation. These are our trading partners. These are our allies. They all have universal coverage. Right now with my insurance company, I cannot get sick in New York because I don't get coverage. And in fact, I can't even leave Albuquerque because my insurance policy won't even cover me outside of my state. And it even limits me to, for example, 1 hospital out of the 3 hospitals, and it's the furthest one away from where I live. So I like to tell people, we have to start thinking a little bit of why we're stuck in this area because companies like to make money. Now, if you think, well, we're still the #1 country in the world and we have the best healthcare, that's absolutely wrong. Okay, so I'm here to open up your eyes. In fact, when I sit with my patients, I use this analogy a lot. It's for those of you who've ever watched the movie The Matrix. Hopefully you've watched it before, old-fashioned movie. So there's a scene with Morpheus, and he's sitting there with Neo, who's Keanu Reeves, and it's the red pill, blue pill discussion, right? He gives him this opportunity. You can take the blue pill, and you can kind of go back to this world of ignorance, or you can take the red pill, and although it's uncomfortable to understand what's happening, you will actually understand and gain consciousness. With consciousness, that'll open your mind to open up to make better decisions, and hopefully that'll liberate you from the kind of these shackles that we kept in. And so today, what we're looking at is opening the consciousness so you understand that you're not here by default. Your disease is not by default of you making bad decisions, but predominantly it's by design. We've kept you there. Systems marketing companies have kept you where you're at, and they're keeping you where you're at. So what did this money give us? $3.8 trillion. That's with a T. $3.8 trillion is what we spent on healthcare, 17.9% of our GDP. And in fact, right now, it's projected to go up to 20% of our GDP in 2 years. $370 billion on drugs was spent. Now, with all this money, what did that get us? we are now ranked 16 at the bottom of the 16, top 16 with the bottom here, from death from all causes. So we die more from infant mortality, homicides, teen pregnancy, HIV, AIDS, drug-related deaths, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, chronic lung disease, and disability more than 16 other countries. Remember, we spent the most. We spent more than any other country combined here. We're now ranking 34 out of 35 countries in terms of life expectancy. So it didn't buy us more life. A lot of people say, well, we pay for all this health care. Shouldn't we be living longer as Americans? No, in fact, this is old data because if you listened to the news 2 weeks ago, the report came out that we fell even further. And then when we look at ranking overall, in terms of diseases A through Z, so from top of your head to the bottom of your head, and all diseases, where do we rank in the world? We're now ranking 46 out of 48 industrial nations in terms of chronic disease care. Today I'm going to talk about the inflammation in your body. So inflammation is the triggering mechanism of all disease. Okay? It's not the cause of disease, it's just that every disease has an inflammatory component. And from A to Z, from Alzheimer's to cancer to diabetes to autoimmune or neurological disease, there's always an inflammatory component of that. And so think of inflammation as the fire within your body. It's a simple way to think about it. And actually, inflammation just means, and it comes from the root word, flam, fire. Okay, inflammation. And the word basically means itis, I-T-I-S. And anything that we put in front of that itis just means inflammation of that area. Now, not all inflammation is bad. We do need some inflammation. For example, we have acute inflammation. So if you have a fever, you're traveling here, coming outside in the rain, you have a little cold or flu, you get a little bit of a fever. That's the good thing. Your body's evoking an immune response to upregulate its temperature so the body can actually fight, fix, and repair itself against a virus or a bacteria. And even in cancer patients, they spike fevers because the body's trying to heal and fight. When you sprain your ankle, for example, that ankle gets swollen. Why does it get swelling? Because the body wants to say, hey, there's an injury here. I need to make a natural cast so that the body doesn't move it, so it'll be stabilized, so the healing can occur. So in an acute response, inflammation is pretty good. But when the inflammation becomes chronic, it becomes a problem. So think of, I have a picture here of your kitchen, your living room, and a bedroom. We need to keep the temperature pretty good. We need a little bit of fire to keep it warm, to cook our food. But when it's an uncontrolled type of inflammation, and we all know, especially if you use a gas fire, how quick in a kitchen that can happen, things can get out of control. So the biggest problem is now with chronic inflammation is chronic inflammation leads to chronic diseases. So you can see here, there's a picture here, there's a knee. If you have a knee, you have chronic inflammation, we call it arthritis. You have a colon, you have chronic inflammation, we call it colitis. On the upper part of that picture, we have vessels. This is your heart. And heart disease, which I'll talk about in a minute. Heart disease is a double whammy. It's that we're eating pro-inflammatory foods which are animal proteins. People will always ask me, what is an animal protein? My answer is anything with a mother or face. Just simple as that, right? So eat less mothers and faces. That's a simple way to remember what an animal protein is. But it's not just the animal protein itself that has the cholesterol that's the problem. It's the pro-inflammatory aspects of that animal protein that makes that cholesterol stick, that ends up having cardiovascular disease and heart attacks and strokes, etc. And then in the bottom there you see the brain, so brain inflammation over time, and now this is going to be one of the biggest factors in the next 15 years that will actually potentially sink the economy in terms of healthcare is dementia, right? Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease. All this chronic inflammation in the brain creates neurodegenerative changes, and there's a couple of lectures here already given that people were talking about brain health. Now, here's where we're going wrong, and this is how we're going to solve this problem. We have over 200 different itises. So let me start from here. So if I have some itchy scalp and I go to my dermatologist, they go, oh, you got some dermatitis, and I have some red eyes, I have some conjunctivitis, and I have a runny nose, I get rhinitis, and I have a stuffy nose, stuffy sinus cavity, and I have some pain, a little bit of fever, I get sinusitis. And then I go to my dentist, and I have bleeding gums, and I get gingivitis. And then I have a thyroid problem called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And then I have a little bit, right now, I have a little bit of laryngitis because I've been talking all day, giving interviews. Some people get a sore throat, but they get pharyngitis. You can have reflux and stomach problems, like GERD, they call it, or reflux, and stomach pain. That's esophagitis and gastritis. Again, I mentioned colitis before. Men can get prostatitis, women can get vaginitis, we all can get arthritis, tendonitis. I mean, the list goes on and on. Now, everybody here in this audience, I can guarantee that we've had some of these itises sometime in our lifetime. Some of us have more than others. And the problem is then we treat it by micromanagement by each specialty in medicine, right? So here's my shampoo for my derm, here's my eye drops, here's my nasal spray, here's my inhaler for my lungs for my bronchitis, I forgot that one. Here's my upper pill, here's my lower pill, and here's my topicals, right? So everybody's treating the inflammation at the level that they see it, but no one ever asks the simple question, what is triggering all this inflammation? And where is it coming from? So that's where we have to go further. It's not just treating inflammation, it's looking at what is the cause of the problem. Now, inflammation over time can then trigger not only chronic disease, but it moves into a serious issue that you can increase your risk for cancer. So those patients that have colitis, inflammation of the colon, 43% over 30 years will develop colon cancer. That chronic inflammation causes degenerative changes. They also can trigger more growths of polyps, and those polyps eventually, more often than not, can turn into cancer over time. Same thing when we're looking at active rheumatoid arthritis. These are just a couple of examples. So someone has active rheumatoid arthritis over 10 years has a 71-time higher rate of getting lymphoma, which is a cancer. Right? I saw 2 patients last year who had rheumatoid arthritis between 12 and 15 years, not managed or resolved, and had lymphoma. We have to look at resolution of disease. So from an integrated perspective, we don't manage disease, we resolve disease. That's the whole intention of medicine. It's supposed to be resolving disease. The problem is the system has been designed to manage your disease, to keep your disease going. So, you have diabetes, you have heart disease, you have blood pressure problems, and forever you have this condition, and as long as we're managing it with medications, management is not resolution. Okay? So we need to be moving towards resolution. Now, the good news is that chronic disease and cancer is predominantly preventable, 97%. So let me tell you this. Diet now is looked at as the largest contributing factor for chronic disease and cancer. Okay? It's about 35–40%. Smoking, which none of you hopefully smoke, or vaping now, hopefully none of you vape, those are also the second most common cause of chronic disease and cancer. Then obesity is number 3, so keeping your body mass index normal. Now, we've grown over time. We've supersized. It's not just the drinks. We as Americans have supersized ourselves, right? You can just go to Texas, for example, and see that. Southern half of my state, even the northern half of my state, obesity is now running rampant. Even morbid obesity is actually growing now in the United States. Infections mean that when we get sick due to our immune system being low, then we actually trigger inflammatory responses. So certain types of viruses, chronic virus conditions, can increase higher risks of certain type of cancers as well, like, say, cervical cancer and stuff like that. And then environmental pollution and radiation and other things. So some people are talking about, like, 5G, and we're looking at organics and trying to avoid the herbicides and pesticides and endocrine disruptors. So these are important things because these are all aspects. And then genetics. Genetics is, this is an old research model. The authors actually came back and redid that. It was actually 5–10% at the time in 2009. Now it's looked at as 2–3%. So disease that's genetically related is only 2–3%. But people will say, well, Dr. Pai, heart disease runs in my family. My grandfather had a heart attack. My dad had a heart attack. My brother had a heart attack. And, heart disease is like the gene that I have. Genes aren't fixed, that we used to think. Genes are in flux. Okay? It's called epigenetics. It's the diet, the lifestyle, the environment, and belief system that it turns on or off the expressions of genes. We all have been dealt the same cards. It's how do you play the game? And what this does with epigenetics, this is why we see things run in family, because it's the same diet and lifestyle, right? So it's something that grandparents pass down to parents, parents pass down to their children. Sometimes no fault of anybody. That's just what we knew. That's what we were told. That's what we were taught. But the nice thing is that we should be focusing on the 97% of disease and things that you can do daily that you can take advantage to control your health. 11 of the top insurance companies, and my book goes through all sorts of politics of food and food industry and health industries, how they're kind of in bed with each other, but 11 of the top insurance companies own about $2 billion of stock in the top 5 fast food companies. Right? So that should make you angry, because that means they're having you buy cheap food that makes you sick, that makes you then have to pay more of a premium and more of a copay and more deductible, and now you have a pre-existing condition, which now they charge you more of these. Right? So there's no health in healthcare anymore. We have to be looking at how can we look at changing the system. Now, my book will explain in detail, I won't go into too much detail, but how come food is so cheap? So I go through each of the steps of each food industry, because you'll be surprised. And, I'll be frank, before I became plant-based, I was vegetarian predominantly. And then I became one of those clean food eaters, oh, my fish came wild caught from Alaska, and my beef was, massaged by Japanese massage therapists, right? My eggs were from Taos, and Taos eggs are free range, and they sit by the fire and they play kumbaya, and this is what we're sold, and all of this is like bad information, by the way. Okay, so my book will cover like pork right now, how the majority of pork in the United States, and now starting recently chicken, is grown here, shipped 7,000 miles to China, processed in China, shipped 7,000 miles back, and it's cheaper than it's ever been, ever. Now, you don't have to be an economist to figure out something is odd with that equation. The book will go and explain why. Farm raised versus wild caught. So we all think, oh, wild caught, wild caught, wild caught. My book will explain how we can take now farm raised fish, they're grown in tanks with antibiotics and pesticides, herbicides, and other animal parts and human parts and stuff like that. It's terrible. And the flesh of the animal is like this darkish, grayish color. And now what they do, they can add a carotenoid that comes from shrimp shells, astaxanthin. You hear that the other day with Gabriel Cousins was talking about how we use that. Well, the industry uses these off shells of the shrimp, and they actually can put it as a natural dye into the tank, and it turns this brown flesh into pink. Okay? Then what they do is there's a machine that's at the side of this river that they're at, and it drops the fish, and it picks them up about 20 feet later, and now it's considered wild caught. This is what it is. And I would just be like, oh, it's wild caught, yeah. The marketing on the internet was really good. Even GMO fish. So the GMO salmon was introduced, right? And they blocked the labeling law, so now you can go get a wild caught GMO salmon, which is, as you can see on the picture here, how big it is. We don't have any long-term studies on the genetic modification of an animal species that have been consumed by humans or what it's going to do to the environment when that has the effect itself on the environmental aspects. And my book will cover things like meat glue. Right? So how do we get steak so cheap? When I was a kid, again, I used to go to a restaurant, and it'd be something very expensive. I'd look over the side, and we'd see someone eating a steak, and they were dressed really nice, and like, wow, we used to look like, wow, they must be, they're higher class. They were able to eat this, or they would go Ruth Chris Steakhouse and stuff like this. But now when you go to the steakhouses, you can get like, you can eat steak and shrimp for $7.99. How is that possible? Because we use things like meat glue. We get all the scraps of any of the meat products. We put this, it's an enzyme that comes from pig's blood and cow blood. We sprinkle it as a powder, we wrap it in cellophane, and then we refrigerate it 6 hours later. It becomes a nice log, and we chop it up in steaks and serve it. Same thing with chicken thighs, and same thing with pork products, okay? I won't cover the chicken today, I won't cover the beef, there's a lot of things, but even what we have here is modified atmospheric packaging. It's how they can take red meats now, like beef, ground beef, and then we actually put it in the cellophane packaging of using carbon dioxide or monoxide, which makes the blood of the tissue there more pink and red. So that's what we think of fresh. But it can keep the food after it's spoiled up to 2 weeks. Now the studies show up to 2 years. Right? So how many people are like, oh, I take this, I cook this, I got sick, I got diarrhea, I eat the same thing. Well, what is it, And people not eating it raw, they're cooking it, right? So here's another example, and then we'll get on. But 5 billion burgers consumed, and people are like, oh, I need my all-beef patty, Dr. Pai. All-beef patty. I used to be like, same thing, again, massage therapy. And the studies showed through the Annals of Diagnostic Pathology, this is a forensics journal, medical journal, that they took and analyzed the meat content in the top 8 fast food chains, and they found it basically had between 2 and 14%. That means 85% to 98% of your all-beef patty is not meat. Shocking, right? So what that means, if you had 2 quarter-pounder cheeseburgers, that's 5 grams of meat protein, which is 5 paper clips worth. Right? So you have to really start thinking like, well, why are we so sick? Because when you were children and you ate this food, you didn't get sick. We didn't get obese, and we didn't have all these inflammatory conditions, because your food is not what it is, right? It can't be cheaper than, when I was a kid, a piece of bacon or something that was added was more expensive. You had to pay $1 or $2 extra. And now it's like you're getting 3 patties with 6 pieces of bacon for $1. Right? Even my book will cover the hot dog report. The hot dog report is something that everybody should be shocked about, because everybody's like, oh, I have ballpark, or this is kosher. One thing that you need to know, whether it's a animal product or even a veggie dog, because they all have to be processed in the same facility to make hot dogs, is that the studies show that across like 12 top major brands that you get at the health food store and at the supermarket, it contains 2% of human DNA. That's not a side little chili finger. That's actually an ingredient now. So you got to think of, like, for those who are older here, Soylent Green, and for those who are younger, Cloud Atlas, and that will give you some ideas. So what does this get us? 1 out of 4 people get sick, 328,000 people go to the hospital, 23,000 Americans die from eating food in America. I'm not talking about some third world, fourth world country. I'm talking about the United States here. 100% of store meat now contains, by USDA reports and consumer groups, 100% of that has bacteria in it. E. coli, salmonella. So that's why if you eat this stuff, you gotta make sure it's cooked. Okay? Some of it has cysts and parasites. Some of them have ammonia from the pink slime and the washing of that. If you don't know what that is, don't look that up before you go eat tonight. Meat now contains 2 to 5 antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So there's another doctor probably talking this week talking about superbugs and resistant things. This is a huge problem, people. Because people now, there are some people who've never taken antibiotics, they get sick, they go to the hospital, and now we give them all these things that doesn't work. It's because the food has been given the antibiotics over and over and over again. And remember, infections that are like E. coli and those things come from inside of the animal's gut. Vegetables do not have E. coli. They don't have listeria. They don't have salmonella. The contamination comes from a factory farm, or a CAFO as we call them, and that actually spills down the water stream. Right now, just a couple of days ago, this administration, I'm going to get political, but they passed a bill to remove the Clean Water Act, right, which protects our rivers and our streams and our lakes. So now we can dump these things. And so if you're an organic farmer and you're growing your vegetables and this comes onto your property and you didn't take it to the market, people will get sick. Where do you get your protein? We all know that. Plants. We need to have one question and one answer. So the main question that people should walk away today is like, is it pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory? Remember, you can get all your protein from plants, vegetable, grains, legume, right? But is it pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory? So if anybody has this argument or discussion or heated discussion, like, well, you need to eat this, I could just ask them and tell them, is it pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory, and just drop the mic and leave. That's all you need to know, right? So this is the main slide I want people to get today, right? Pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. So animal protein is pro-inflammatory, plant protein is anti-inflammatory. Animal protein increases inflammation, it has cholesterol, little to no antioxidants, it has no phytonutrients, no fiber, and triggers heterocyclic amines, which are cancer-causing particles when you grill it. Okay? And plants are just the opposite. They lower inflammation, they have no cholesterol, yay. They're high in antioxidants, super high in phytonutrients, because they're plants. They have fiber, which you need, and there's no heterocyclic amines when you grill them. All right, so let me go into this in a little bit of detail. So inflammation real quick, we look at the pathway here. This is the arachidonic acid pathway. Arachidonic acid is what is triggered from eating higher amounts of animal protein. Also got to be careful of some of the refined vegetable oils. So too much French fries and fried foods is not so good for you. Right? So the vegans who just eat French fries all day, they're still going to get inflammation as well. Right? So we want to cut down on eating too much excess oil. It's okay to eat the actual soy, the actual seeds, the actual nuts, but we want to lower some of the amounts of the refined products. But when people take ibuprofen, Motrin, Advil, those kind of drugs that are lowering their inflammation, and we're trying to lower these pathways here. But if you don't put it in your mouth, you don't need to take those products. Okay? Now, cholesterol. A lot of doctors will be here this week talking about cholesterol, so I won't spend too much time. Your body does produce cholesterol. We do need some. We can't have zero, but you don't want to have too much. Too much cholesterol that comes from the food, again, with the inflammation, causes cardiovascular disease. Remember, 3 people every minute will have a heart attack in the United States. 3 people. Okay? 3 jumbo jets of people die every day in America due to heart disease. There's no war on heart disease. Everybody's worried about terrorism. I'm not worried about terrorism. I'm worried about what my patients are going to eat at their next meal. Because that's what they're going to die from more likely than not. Okay, we can reverse heart disease. There'll be doctors here later on that will talk about reversing, so I won't get in there. But you can actually reverse heart disease clinically in clinical cardiology, even by angiogram. And the book will cover examples of patients that we're being able to take off of the heart transplant list, just moving to a whole foods, plant-based diet. And we can reverse all vessels, even documented on angiogram. Black box warning. Okay, so this is my soapbox. I thought of all this other stuff. I was like, okay, if you don't understand eating plants now, you should. By the end of the conference, everybody's going to be growing a garden on some level. So, good. Black box warning. What's a black box warning? Okay, so this is something that everybody should know. And this is what I've become well known to talk about because we're looking at the black box warning. Every drug that you get on the market, it may have a black box warning or it may not. What a black box warning is the following. When you look at the monograph of a drug, any drug that you take, whether it's over-the-counter or by prescription, it will have something what they call common side effects and serious side effects. Okay? So common side effects, for example, taking ibuprofen or Motrin or Advil, is just like diarrhea, constipation, heartburn, reflux, ringing in the ears, swelling of the ankles, okay? Maybe rash, okay? Not life-threatening, won't die from it, but maybe not so comforting, right? Then there's serious reactions, and serious reactions mean something that can cause a heart attack or a stroke or a GI bleed, okay, or some cancer of some kind. Those are rare. So rare things occur rarely, common things occur commonly. However, if a product has a problem that's serious, that then starts to occur commonly, then the FDA puts out what they call a black box warning, which means you can end up in the black box. Okay? Now, I like this cartoon. It says FDA-approved drug, and it says warning contains FDA-approved drug, because that's really what it's at. What happens is this. Once you get that little package or bottle and you tear open that package, so right now if I went to the gift shop right here, say, oh, my back hurts, my feet are killing me, let me take an ibuprofen, or let me take any kind of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory right now. If I tear open that package or I open the bottle, I've already accepted the terms and conditions that this can happen. The black box can happen, and there's no legal recourse that you can take against the manufacturer. So when we think of NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, this is what 1/3 of Americans take daily, 30 different types of prescriptions, right? So it's not just, ibuprofen is Motrin and Advil. Those are brand names. But you can go to get Walprofen, Cevus. There's tons of generics of those, right? And we think of naproxen as Aleve, and we think of celecoxib as Celebrex. But these all have black box warnings, right? So one of the things that people have to understand is that when we look at the data, lifestyle, heart disease is number one in killing people. I mentioned that earlier. Cancer, stroke. But when we actually look at other data saying what is still killing Americans even more than heart disease, that's not lifestyle, it's not terrorism, it's not anything else that we should worry about. It's actually medical errors and side effects. Kill more people than heart disease, than cancer, and stroke combined. So my book will cover this data because this is something, when people say, oh, well, people die of heart disease. Yeah, but people are now dying more of drug interactions, side effects, and medical errors in our system than actually the diseases that we're trying to treat with those medications. Now, all the NSAIDs have black box warnings. So you can have a heart attack, a stroke, or a GI bleed at any time taking just one of them. So we used to think, oh my God, you have to take tons of ibuprofen or tons of Aleve to have a heart attack or stroke or GI bleed. No, you can say, I just have, have menstrual cramps once a month. I just take this for my period pain. Or I have back pain or my feet today. I'm going into a lecture just once a month, okay, so I'm going to take one of these things. I can take that and I can have a heart attack even if I eat plant-based and my vessels are clear. If you have any comorbid conditions like obesity, diabetes, heart disease, blood pressure problems, your risk is higher. If you have any problems like, oh, I take an acid blocker or a purple pill or have IBS, your risk for a GI bleed or intestinal perforation is higher, right? But we don't count these in the data because this is not the cause of death. We will say, oh, well, they were under stress or they already had heart disease. So this is contributing to why we're having more people have these things. So what we want to look at is there something natural that we can give that's anti-inflammatory, that's safe, natural, clinically effective, and yes. And so this drove me not only to research what is causing our inflammation from the food in our diet, but it's also what can we give that's not a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, because in my opinion, it's not correct for a lifestyle physician or a plant-based doctor to be like, okay, let's eat more plants, and then, oh, you have a pain problem, take ibuprofen. That to me is just as a disconnect. Because food is medicine, and there's plant medicines that come from plants that we should be using instead of just using pharmaceuticals that might have side effects, okay? I'm not anti-drug, by the way. I'm not anti-pharma. I'm just pro-patient, pro-safety, pro-data. And if the data shows that something is not as good as they proclaim it or market to, then I will look at what is safer, what is more efficacious, and what's more affordable. So along with the 10 steps, these are the 10 steps, I want to just finally end up with a few things. Sugar and salt. That's another part of the book. Sure. So sugar and salt. And again, I have all these steps, so you can see there, healthy glucose. And I'll go into the history. So even with sugar, it's not just that sugar is bad. If you understood the history of how sugar was even brought to this country, you'll be surprised. I'll leave that up to you to read. But sugar is pro-inflammatory, right? We eat too much of it. Most of it's GMO. Most of it's high fructose corn syrup. And so this is a pro-inflammatory state. So when people have diabetes, they have 4 times the risk of heart disease. Now we call it type 3 diabetes, where when people have this high or even mildly lower elevated blood sugar, that this causes a chronic inflammation in the brain. So when we talked about Alzheimer's and dementias and Parkinson's disease, this is just this chronic inflammatory state that most people are walking around in. So we're eating way too much sugar. I'll cover all that. There's wonderful studies in my book showing that there's been schools and prisons that have removed sugar from they did control studies where they remove the sugar from the diet in the school, and the kids' grades and their behavioral scores go up. Okay, prisons, when they remove the sugar from the diet in the prison, then less fights and more, there's more cooperation between the inmates, right? So this is something that, we actually have thousands of studies now that we're looking at the role of sugar, and obviously we're looking at even children, sugar causing inflammation in the brain, causing behavioral problems. Salt is another problem. Salt, people take too much salt. Now, we like natural salts. I like to use more of what we consider the Himalayan salts, the salts that are mined. But you have to be careful of the mined salts because it has to actually say that it's sourced from the Himalayas. There's a lot of what they call pink salt out there that will not be sourced from the Himalayas. It's just salt with pink color. And people will think it's coming from that. So you have to be careful of that. Remember, everything is being adulterated. In sea salt, I don't recommend sea salt. Sea salt has microplastics in it. Sea salt also is just whatever the sea is coming in, that's just dried up. So where you're getting sea salt, whether it's coming from Louisiana or coming from the salt flats or some other place, you have to look at what's the source of the environment. And right now, there's too many things in the ocean that's causing pollution for the sea salt to be recommended. Meditation and yoga. If I could put this in a pill, I would. And I'd be the richest man in the world. I can't state how important meditation and yoga is. My book will cover the data. Because a lot of people think, oh, it's meditation, oh, it's just yoga. No, if it's done correctly and properly, and we have all sorts of wonderful controlled studies looking at how we can improve your immune system, how we can lower your blood pressure, lower your cholesterol, lower your, even improve bone density with yoga. Okay? But I'm not talking about hot yoga, I'm not talking about Mick yoga, I'm not talking about beer yoga or goat yoga. These are all just trends that people will try to take something that's actually a true art. It's a true science. And in India we have masters and PhDs of yoga. People go through years in school and training. We have protocols in our clinic where we can reverse heart disease, diabetes, we can help with mood disorders. And they just do that with yoga. So that's another level. We use herbs because that's kind of what we think. I'm more of a doctor in my thinking, so I like to give things. Right, prescribe herbs, prescribe diets, and all. But there's another level of mind-body medicine where you don't even need the supplements. You don't even need the herbs. Certain types of pranayama, breathing techniques, certain meditation techniques, certain asanas can actually reverse the disease. And they have clinics in India where they actually have run by MD doctors, and we take patients in, and they do all these therapies, and I was shocked. I'm like, you don't give even herbs? You don't need to. So there's levels of health that you can get, and so if you're tired of saying, well, I'm tired of even taking supplements, then you can go even further, okay? So meditation and yoga are very, very important. Lastly, I want to talk about this, love, happiness. John Lennon said all you need is love. It's really important. We do need love. Not only loving each other, but we have to love ourselves, right? And a lot of times right now, people who are having a lot of animosity and hatred to other people is because they actually don't love themselves. And so we have to look at when people have what they call coexistence, or we call tribe, they live longer. All the studies will show people that have cancer, for example, right? If they just, like I mentioned yesterday, if women who have breast cancer have group and they just meet once a week or once every 2 weeks and they just talk and share amongst themselves, they live 15 years longer. 15 years. If we have a drug that keeps someone alive in the ICU for 30 days, it's considered a blockbuster and will make anywhere from $8 to $13 billion on the market. And here's 15 years longer, right? We need to live with a sense of purpose. Again, the studies will show that if you have purpose, even someone with a cancer patient, anybody with chronic disease, it's not saying, I'm going to kill my cancer, I'm going to fight my cancer. It's, I'm living with purpose. If you live with purpose, those patients live longer because the focus is on doing what they're doing. Oh, I like to grow this, I like to help my people. Sharing and serving others, as simple as that sounds, is so profound, right? So when we see patients in our clinic, we see a lot of cancer patients. Okay, that's because cancer is now 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women in the United States, unfortunately, through standard American diet, lifestyle, environment. But when we look at these aspects, we like to take a cancer survivor and turn them into a cancer thriver, right? As Americans, we all can survive, right? You're New Yorkers, you survive a lot of things. You have 9/11, you have, you can have a hurricane, you can have power outages, you can have gun shootings. Americans, we're good. We can survive. But we need to do better than surviving. Right? Because, again, anybody can survive, but are we thriving? Thriving means that you're doing better than what you were before you had your diagnosis. Our goal is through the epigenetics that we teach and the 10 steps in my book, we can help resolve and fix those things. And community is a very important thing. So if you don't have community, hopefully here you meet someone, hopefully you get connected with someone, that maybe will share this journey of going on a plant-based diet or eating better or going to more of these conferences, support communities like this, because this is important, because believe it or not, there's a value in this. And as collectively we coexist, then this is how we shape policy. This is how we shape buying patterns, right? By eating more organic, and hopefully some of the stores may carry more organic products. By eating some of these, let's say, I don't want to have this because this has herbicides or pesticides. That changes buying patterns. Every time you buy something, you're voting, right? So hopefully through community, through coexisting, we can do this. Now, in my book, I do have a lot of quotes. I play drums, I play guitar. I'm known as the rock doc. We see a lot of celebrities, we see a lot of athletes, we see a lot of musicians. We help them with their lifestyle as well. And so I like to end with this, because it's a quote that I want people to think about, and it's from actually a band that's a little bit politically active right now. It's called Rage Against the Machine. And the quote goes, it has to start somewhere, it has to start sometime. What better place than here, and what better time than now? Thank you.